Good evening. My name is Kendall Killian. I'm the District Director for Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. We have a very exciting event tonight, a coffee and Kulan conversation with the Congresswoman, as well as Secretary of State Steve Simon and Representative Emma Greenman. We are delayed in getting started. The Congresswoman is in Washington, D.C. this evening, voting on issues related to the Violence Against Women Act, the reauthorization. And so we will get started in just about 5 or 6 minutes. Once again, we are doing our coffee and Kulan conversation this evening with Congresswoman Omar, as well as Secretary of State Steve Simon and Representative Emma Greenman. It's going to be a great event, a great conversation about democracy, and we're just delayed this evening. We'll get started in about 5 minutes. Thank you.
All right, Kendall, are we ready to get started?
Yeah. I think we might be on.
Well, good evening, everyone. We're really so excited for you to join us for this important conversation on democracy reform and legislation we will be pursuing at a state and federal level. I will soon be joined by Minnesota Secretary of State Steve Simon and Representative Emma Green. The 2020 election underscores the need for comprehensive structural democratic reforms. Americans across the country were forced to overcome rampant voter suppression, gerrymandering, and a torrent of special interest dark money just to exercise their right to vote and their voice in our democracy. It shouldn't be this way. Recently, the United States Congress in the House took necessary steps to end the culture of corruption in Washington by passing H.R. 1, which is our For the People legislation, our huge democracy reform legislation. As we saw on January 6th, our democracy is very much under attack. We are seeing state legislators across state legislature across the country and here in Minnesota make it harder and harder for people to vote. As someone who survived civil conflict, I know personally that political violence does not go away on its own. We need dramatic reforms to end corruption and restore our democracy. H.R. 1 ends the dominance of big money in politics, protects the right to vote, and strengthens campaign finance oversight. This bill is a critical step, and it will go a long way. I'm particularly proud that the bill once again includes our Paul Act, my bill to strengthen enforcement of foreign lobbying. I hope the Senate and the President will take up H.R. 1 as soon as possible. The fate of our republic depends on it. In addition to passing H.R. 1, I believe we must also remove other relics from our racist history, like the Electoral College and the Senate filibuster. In 2020, Minnesota once again led the nation in voter turnout, in part due to the efforts of our guests tonight. But there is more we can do to secure our elections here in Minnesota. And as a laboratory for improvement that can start here and then spread nationwide. House File 9 in Minnesota would, among other things, implement automatic voter registration. The bill would also restore the civil rights to vote to individuals who have been convicted of a felony once the individual has completed incarceration. And the bill would create a new democracy dollar coupon program that would empower small donors and minimize the corrupting influence of big money in our state elections. Even as we pursue these pro-democracy bills at a state and federal level, other elected officials across the nation have introduced over 200 bills to restrict voting access. Democracy only flourishes with more participation, not less. That's why we are expanding voting rights and access to the ballot box. That's what we are here to talk about tonight. And with that, I would like to introduce our first guest, Secretary of State Steve Simon. Simon was first elected in 2014. As the Secretary of State, he partnered with townships, cities, county officials to organize elections on behalf of Minnesota's nearly 4 million eligible voters and to ensure that the election system is fair. Welcome, Simon.
Thank you for having me.
Would you like to get, and then our next guest is State Representative Emma Green. Before her election to the state legislature, Emma served as the Director of Voting Rights and Democracy at the Center for Popular Democracy. She's also public defender and has worked to combat over-incarcerated minority populations. I'll give you both a minute if you have opening remarks.
Well, sure. I just want to thank you for having us. This really means a lot. This is a very important moment in our history. And just really quickly, we just went through an election, the 2020 election, that was unlike any other. We all know this. Elections are intense. They're supposed to be intense. They're a clash of ideas and approaches and records, and that's okay. Presidential elections are even more intense because we're electing the most powerful person in the world. But when you layer on top of all of that, the fact that we were doing this during a once-in-a-century pandemic, that meant something that was particularly intense. Fortunately, the election went very well. Democracy held. Our institutions did what they were supposed to do. And Minnesota, as you heard, got back to #1 in the country in voter turnout. And although we're very pleased with that and very proud about that, we can't break our arms patting ourselves on the back too much because we know that we have a lot of work to do. All of us agree with that. We can't just sit idly by. And one of the reasons we have a lot of work to do is there is a ton of disinformation out there right now as we speak about the 2020 election. And I'm sure we'll get into that. Another reason is we know that even in Minnesota, we can and we need to do better. We got to just under 80% turnout, which is fantastic, led the nation, and that's great. But that means 20% of our folks who are eligible to vote are not voting. We got to figure out why that is and remove obstacles and unnecessary barriers to voting. That's what I'm all about. And I look forward to hearing from Representative Greenman and Congresswoman Omar as well about how we can explore making things better. Thank you.
Wonderful. Representative Greenman.
Well, thank you. And I'm just so excited to be here with both of you. I wish we were drinking coffee in person with all of you out there and together. But I think just to tack on to both what you talked about with House File 1 and also HR 1, and also the amazing work that the Secretary of State and everybody, all those 30,000 elections officials and judges in Minnesota did to make sure that we had a fair and inclusive election. The reason I think that this matters so much is that our democracy works best when everybody has a voice: Black, Brown, Indigenous, white, folks from Greater Minnesota, Metro, the cities, young folks, students, our elders, everybody, Democrats, Republicans, Independents. And I think that that's what we're trying to do, is make sure that we have a structure that is maximum participation and where the voices of Minnesotans, and I think, nationally, the work that you're doing, Congresswoman Omar, nationally, that the voices of Americans are what drives our policy. And I think that multi-generational, multiracial, gender inclusive politics is really what we're about. And it feels like, in addition to the cracks we've seen and the real threats in 2020, we've been seeing this for years. And one of the things that is, in addition to seeing these restrictions that are really about silencing the voices of folks, particularly Black and Brown folks, New Americans, students, we've also seen this disconnect between what the public is telling us they want, and I'm seeing this firsthand in the legislature, whether it's $15 minimum wage or paid family leave, which we just heard today in the House, it's on my mind, or climate change or whatever it is. The public is asking and demanding, and I'm sure that you're hearing that too, Congresswoman Omar. We need to get that done, and we need a democracy that is built so that we are that Minnesota and their values and Americans and their values at the core of how we're governing. And so I am so grateful to be here with two champions and talking about what we can do to make that happen.
Thank you both. I was so excited for this conversation, but as anything goes here in Congress, it ended up being a time where we have active votes. And so I might not be able to participate for the rest of the forum. I will certainly try to run back and forth between votes, but my District Director Kendall Killian will be here and helping moderate some of the questions that were sent to us previously, and then take directly some of the questions that are coming in and pose it to both of you. I know that our constituents are in good hands with the two of you. Maybe I'll do the first question to Secretary Simon. I know that there certainly was something extremely unique to this presidential election. And it is important for us as we try to think about taking steps forward to reflect, right, on the past. So I'm wondering if there are things that we've learned from this election that can help us strategize moving forward into other elections.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I really appreciate it. I think basically the way I would put that is Minnesotans like to vote. They will lean in, they will vote, which means when you reduce and eliminate unnecessary barriers, they will go to town. And they did so this last time, almost 80% turnout, highest in 64 years, even for #1 Minnesota. And so one of the tools, just to give an example that worked really, really well in 2020, was urging people to use the option, if they wanted to, of voting from home, absentee voting. Something that we made much more widely available in 2013. It was actually my bill in the Minnesota legislature, but many others own a piece of that, which made it so that anyone who wants to vote that way can. And for all the obvious reasons, since we have a once-in-a-century pandemic, a lot of people wanted to do that. So looking back, one of the takeaways I have, just in terms of what our office contributed to, is that we had 58% of voters, 58%. Voting that way, either from home or in some way before election day. Just think about that. That means only 42% of voters, the entire state, voted in the traditional way of going to a designated polling place on a designated day between designated hours. There's nothing wrong with that. And I hope to get back to that way of voting as soon as we can, because I like voting that way. But that's one takeaway that we had, I think, in particular, that I would focus on, is I think that is here to stay. And that the days when people are told, no, you can only vote in this one particular way or place or during these hours, people don't really want that anymore. Most people don't. And so that's just one example of the kinds of things that we need to do to free up options. That's why Representative Greenman, her efforts are heroic in the bill that she's drafted in the Minnesota House. And it's why I'm so grateful to Congress for its actions on HR 1, which will do even more to make more opportunities to vote available to more people.
Right. Thank you. Representative Greenman, do you have anything to add about what we learned in 2020?
No, I mean, I think you just heard it from the expert. I think that when you look at what happened all over the country, we saw an amazing effort by folks to participate. Voters from all across demographics, voters from all regions, voters from all parties. And what we also learned is high voter turnout helps Democrats, it helps Republicans, it helps independents, it helps our democracy. And I think we also saw more barriers than we have seen, not here in Minnesota, but than we have seen in a long, long time in 2020. And we're seeing, and this is sort of what Congressman Omar was referring to, we're seeing an increase of that, and sort of all of the procedural and also the ways that have been built up to make it harder to cast a ballot, to make it harder for that ballot to be counted, and to sort of create a level of fear and intimidation around that process. And so I think what we know is we have to learn from that. Here in Minnesota, I think one of the things and one of the things that's reflected in my bill is we learned that there is voter there was an attempt at voter intimidation with this Atlas Aegis security company that was talking about bringing in armed security guards. And through the real efforts of our Attorney General, they were able to prevent that this time. But we know we need stronger tools to ensure that everybody feels safe and welcomed when they go vote, that election judges feel like they can do their jobs, and and so all of those pieces, I think we're learning. We just have to really make sure that we have the structure and the infrastructure in place so that people feel the power, however they vote and however they participate, that they feel that power.
Right.
Kendall, can I just echo one thing that Representative Greenman just said? I don't want to belabor the point, but I'm really glad that she mentioned it. I hope that 2020 is the start of the turning of the corner about the narrative of high voter turnout. She said it, and it's absolutely true. You look at the numbers. High turnout benefited both of the biggest major political parties. The Trump campaign did a really fine job of turning out and finding new supporters and getting new people to vote, as did the Biden campaign. So it didn't advantage one party over the other at all, either in Minnesota or nationwide. And I hope this is the beginning of that realization nationwide. High turnout is good for everybody. We want people's voices to be heard. We want to reduce and eliminate unnecessary barriers. And that's a point worth repeating, I think.
It is, absolutely. Thank you. And as you mentioned, once again, Minnesota led the nation in voter turnout. That's something I know that you, Secretary Simon, often tout. And a large part of that was early voting and absentee voting. Do you foresee that being a big part of our elections going forward, or was that like an aberration because of the pandemic?
I do not think it's an aberration. I think it's part of an upward climb. So I hate to bury you or the audience with numbers, but as I said, 58% this time did that. In the previous election in 2018, we weren't starting at zero. In 2018, it was 24%. So it more than doubled. I don't think we're going back to 24%. I'm not saying it'll hover in the next election at 58 either. We're not going back to 24. I think reliably, probably conservatively, over a third, at least a third, will going forward want that to make that the primary way that they vote. And so that has a lot of downstream effects that we can talk about. But I think it's part of this growing hybrid system that we have in Minnesota, where people are figuring out, hey, I don't have to vote in a particular way. I can do it with my feet up. I can do it while sitting on the couch. I can do it while watching TV or folding laundry or whatever. And that's part of what made us such a success this year, I think.
Great. And Representative Freeman, do you want to just give us an overview of your bill and tell us more about what you're working on at the state level?
Yeah, thank you. And I think to what Secretary Simon said, a lot of this work has started, has been around and has been his work in the legislature, and a whole bunch of folks in the legislature have been working on this. But really what House Bill 9, the Democracy for the People Act, does is it responds to both the urgent and what we learned this year, and also the overdue. And so I'd say it does four things. First, it defends and strengthens the right to vote. So it actually, we need to increase and really think about how we protect the vote and protect our elections administrators. And so it has a voter intimidation provision that ensures that law enforcement has what they need, just to ensure that we can have polling places that are welcoming and safe, and where folks who are doing the work are free from intimidation and fear. The other thing it does is it strengthens voting rights, and so we talked about a few of those things, but ensuring that voter registration is a bridge, not a barrier. So automatic voter registration, ensuring that when folks are going to the DMV and they're already given their information that they're registered to vote, that 16 and 17-year-olds can pre-register to vote at a time where they're at home and they're in school, and it's a good time to get folks registered. Restoring the right to vote for those 55,000 Minnesotans who are living on probation and parole, who really need to be at the center of our conversations and our democracy. And then doing a whole bunch of things, and the Secretary of State's been really good at this, local elections administrators have been really good at this, is actually just figuring out how we can do things better. An early voting system that works better for counties and cities. And then the two other things it does is it ensures that Minnesotans know who's spending money in our elections. So it's about how we vote, but it's also about all the ways we participate. And so it tries to expose some of the dark money that's spending money in our politics, and requires disclosure of donors, so you don't have this nesting doll problem of Minnesotans for hot dish and not knowing who's trying to spend money. And then we have, and I think Congresswoman Omar mentioned it, a Democracy Dollars program. So one of the things that's really important to people is that we get big money out of politics, and it's really important that we put citizens and small donors in. And a Democracy Dollar coupon would mean that every registered voter would be able to get two $25 coupons to give to the candidate of their choice, so that they can decide who are the candidates I want to support and who are the candidates I want to help get their message out. And then the last piece is ensuring that our redistricting is fair and transparent and has citizen input, and is really built with the criteria that Minnesotans need. So that's at the core of the bill.
Thank you for the overview of your bill. And I just want to again reiterate for folks watching that Congresswoman Omar needed to step out and go back across the street in DC and vote. One of the things they're voting on tonight are votes related to the Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act. So she'll be back. We hope to see her again in the next half hour or so here. And we're just balancing all the different things we have to do tonight. So we're continuing our conversation with Representative Greenman and Secretary Simon. Next question comes from a viewer, and folks, if you're watching, you can go ahead and ask questions on Facebook or wherever you're seeing us. So Secretary Simon, you tweeted this afternoon or this evening about news today that Russia and Iran interfered in our election in 2020. What steps are you taking to make sure that our elections are safeguarded here in Minnesota?
Yeah, two new reports came out today. I mean, literally within the last few hours. And secretaries of state got a briefing just before they came out. One report said that Iran and Russia have been deliberately spreading disinformation and lies about our election, lying about or inflating allegations of election machines malfunctioning or redistributing votes or reassigning votes. That did not happen, yet those two adversaries are saying that it did. And the reason they're saying that it did is it serves their purpose of undermining confidence in our democracy. So I think that's really, really important. And to know that when you hear people saying those things, which we already knew were unsubstantiated, that they are in essence doing the bidding, whether they know it or not, whether they intend to or not, are doing the bidding and furthering the aims of our adversary in spreading disinformation and lies about the election. So what are we doing about it? One of the things that all of us can do about that kind of disinformation is to meet lies and meet disinformation with the truth. Now, that alone isn't going to make those things vanish. I understand that. All of us understand that. But it's a necessary base that you got to build. And let me be clear about what the truth is. The truth is the 2020 election was fair, accurate, honest, and secure, period. That is the case. Doesn't mean it was perfect. But it means that those things are true. And don't just take my word for it. Look at what the intelligence authorities said today. Look at what the former President Trump's Attorney General, Bill Barr, said. Look at what the FBI director, also appointed by the former president, said under oath in sworn testimony just a couple of weeks ago. So this isn't just me or Representative Greenman talking. This is others who really have taken a deep dive into the intelligence. So at the very minimum, we've got to meet the lies with truth and talk about how well the election went. Our democracy is intact. Our institutions did what they were supposed to do. And then going forward, I think it's about, sharing more information, being as open and transparent as possible to persuade people who aren't yet persuaded that we have a very good and secure election system. Certainly not perfect. And there are, as Representative Greenman knows, and Congresswoman Omar knows, there are many things we can do to make it even better. But in Minnesota in particular, we have a good system that functioned well and did right by the people of Minnesota.
Representative Greenman, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think that to what Secretary Simon said is, the best way to restore and instill confidence in our elections is to tell the truth and tell the truth about the power of Minnesota voters. And also make sure that we're rejecting the lies and the disinformation. And I think when what I've been telling to a lot of folks is talk to your local election judge. They're probably your neighbor. Talk to the voter who voted for the first time. Talk to your neighbor who may have voted absentee for the first time and now loves it. Talk to a county elections administrator. There's so many people in Minnesota, and this is true across the country, who just make our elections work. And many of them are friends, our neighbors, there are teachers and everything. I actually was talking to a student today who told me that they'd been an election judge for the last 2 years, a student at Hamlin. And so I think that it is critical that when we hear these attacks, they're actually not about some boogeyman in the sky. They're about us, right? They're about those election judges who are working and doing their work. They're about those county auditors who are doing that work. And so it's really critical. One, make sure you thank them for all and this year it was a real heroic effort, right? A lot of folks put their health on the line and really showed up in real and big ways. And so I think that as we think about all of the disinformation and fear, it is really critical that we counter it with both the solid optimism of what actually happened, and also the really important investment in each other. That is our elections.
And our next question comes from Brian. Can you talk about public financing? I know, Representative Greenman, you previously served on the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board, and your bill does include enhancing public financing for elections, which is actually something Minnesota has been, really ahead, a nation leader on for many years. And so maybe starting with you, Representative Greenman, can you talk about public financing for elections?
Yeah, yes. And so, and I'm glad you asked, because I think one of the pieces of, as we think about one of the pieces of participation, Minnesotans, Americans believe, and they're right, that there's too much money in our politics, and particularly too much big concentrated money, right? It should be people who are deciding. It should be candidates who are raising grassroots money and working together to ensure that that they can run campaigns powered by the folks in the district, powered by grassroots advocacy. And one of the things that public financing does is it says that candidates can go, they can accept a set of rules and some limits, and in return, they can power their campaigns really with a broad and robust public financing system. So what my bill does is two things. One, it takes our political contribution refund, which we have here in Minnesota, and we've had for a long time, which allows any eligible voter to participate up to $50 for their campaign. It makes it a coupon, so you can give it to that candidate knocking on your door. You can give it to the your friend who decides to run for office, whoever it is. And then the other thing it does is it has a small dollar match, which means that if I raise, it encourages candidates to raise money in small dollars, and then it's matched by public funds, so that the donation of somebody who can give $50 or $10, let's say, my math is not great, is matched 6-to-1 in the district. And so then it'll be a $60 contribution. These are really critical ways that we are empowering our communities, our constituents, donors, small dollar donors, to really be able to participate in the process. And the other thing we know is when people give $5 or $10 or $20, they continue to participate. People feel good about it. And so we want a system that really does that and centers people, and not big corporate dollars, big independent expenditures, big money. So that at its core, that's what it's about.
Great, thank you. What other ways can we make sure our voting system here in Minnesota is safe and secure?
Well, I'll take a crack at that one. In terms of security, from the standpoint of what we were just talking about, someone trying to get into the guts of the system, right? Someone trying to mess with the infrastructure, the equipment, the tabulation technology and the software, that kind of thing. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of money to do that. Let's rewind back to 2016. In 2016, here's something we do know. This is a fact. In 2016, Minnesota was one of the 21 states that was targeted for intrusion by a foreign government, by the Russian government. They sought to target our election infrastructure, meaning the bells and whistles, the equipment, the hardware, the software. Fortunately, they didn't do that in Minnesota, but they wanted to, and they made some efforts to. And so since then, all people in the democracy business, as I am, have been on notice that if you want to thwart that kind of thing, if you want to turn it away, first you got to listen to the experts, the folks in the intelligence community, the folks who know what the threats are out there, the folks who have the know-how, the technological know-how to make sure you can, block this stuff. And when we're talking about a nation state here, this isn't necessarily the hacker down the street. These are nation states with deep pockets and virtually unlimited budgets. So you got to go with what the intelligence folks say. It doesn't matter what the administration is, Trump, Biden, whatever, the intelligence professionals. And number two, you got to put your money where your mouth is, which was why I'm really grateful over the last couple of years that Congress has stepped up and stood up and provided much needed resources for people like me, and not just me, elections administrators around the country, to make sure we can do the things that the intelligence community recommends. I'll just tell you, as a matter of common sense, how it works. They'll come into our office and the offices of my colleagues around the country. They'll do a really deep dive over a couple weeks. They'll do physical stuff. They'll do, cyber stuff. They'll try to find the weaknesses, right? Find the soft spots. They'll write up a big report and they'll say, here's the list of things we think you need to do to make sure that you can be as safe as possible. And I'm just here to tell you, it's a really expensive list. And so Congress, thank goodness, has realized that, and in the past couple of years has made available to us funds so that we can do the things that the intelligence community is saying we should do. On an ongoing basis, I'd like to see a more regular a stream of funding, maybe a dedicated stream of funding, rather than just, as grateful as I am, and we all are, for the one-offs, the big surge of funds in 2019, the big surge of funds in 2020, something a little bit more regular, that would be really optimal and ideal. But no question about it, we can't keep our eye off the ball. We know that this cycle, that kind of thing did not happen per the reports today. But we know that it could happen, that our adversaries have both the appetite to do it again and the capability to do it again. So we've got to keep our eye on that.
And let me just say one thing from a state level too. This is what our secretary is talking about, is the infrastructure of our democracy. And that requires that we, just like our roads and bridges, just like our schools and everything else, that we are actually investing in ensuring that the infrastructure of our democracy works and that it works for Minnesotans. And so that means we need a budget at the federal level that does that on a regular basis. As you said, we shouldn't wait for a pandemic, and at the state level. Because these are the things that really undergird everything else we do. This is about investing in Minnesotans having a voice and participating and being at the center of our policymaking. And so I think as we think about all of those things that our counties need, our cities need, our Secretary of State and our whole Office of Secretary of State need, that's the infrastructure of our elections. And so I am grateful for the federal support, and also think at the state level we should be in there too, reflecting our values.
Great. Our next question comes from Kate, Representative Greenman. What are the chances of your bill passing into law with a Republican Senate? Can we make strides on democracy reform on the state level with a divided legislature?
Yeah, so I have often said that the policies in my bill are not bipartisan, they're nonpartisan, because they really are. And if you look at many of the voting provisions, automatic voter registration is in 23 states. The Restoring the Right to Vote, Florida just did it in 2018. Red states, blue states, purple states have done all of these things. And for our voters, right, for Minnesota voters, they help all voters. And as we said, Democrat, Republican, Independent, folks with no party at all. And so I think rooting the democracy reform really in that conversation is really critical, because folks want to turn this into a partisan conversation. It shouldn't be. Now, that being said, I think that what you see with my bill and what you see in the House is a real commitment to strengthening, expanding access and participation. And what we see in the Senate in Senator Newman's bills, a voter ID bill and provisional balloting and a whole bunch of other stuff that's on the Senate side that actually would restrict access and really it will silence voices. And so given that environment, I think what we need to do is listen to Minnesotans. And so what can we do? I think we need to hear really loudly and enthusiastically what Minnesotans want in terms of access to the ballot, in terms of money and politics reform that ensure that your voices and that small dollars are really what power our elections, and not big corporations, not special interests, not dark money. When we get to redistricting, I think what we really need to hear is Minnesotans telling us what their communities look like, telling us all of those amazing things about this big, beautiful, diverse state that we live in, and how we should shape and draw our lines based on that. And so I think that it is a really, what I am really hopeful for is that we have heard, I've been a voting rights lawyer for a long time now, and I will say in the last year, we all went through 2020 was a really tough year for everybody. But the amount, and I probably Secretary Simon, and I'm sure Congressman Omar would say the same things, the amount that we're hearing, right? The public demand, Minnesotans across the state really saying, this is important to me, and I want to help. I want to be a part of this. And so that is really critical, and that can't lay up. We're gonna keep my bill will be in the 6th committee in a couple of weeks, and we're going to keep going on that. And we just need to keep hearing those voices, because that's ultimately what we should be responding to is what Minnesotans and what Americans want their democracy to look like.
Excellent. Next question is from Stephanie. How can we expand vote by mail locally and nationally? And to Secretary Simon, perhaps you could talk about what Minnesota has done, how this was a big part of our election during the coronavirus pandemic, and how we can build up moving forward. HR 1 does improve access to the ballot box by taking aim at institutional barriers. But what else can we do to expand early voting and vote by mail?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, voting by mail, voting from home really absolutely took off like a rocket in 2020 for some of the obvious reasons. Just public health considerations, right? People saying, I don't want to take the risk, or saying, I'm okay taking the risk, but I want to minimize the risk for other people in the polling place. We can cut in half the number of people at the polling place, make people feel good about going there. But I think we could do more. One of the things that we saw this year also take off is the use of drop boxes. That's something that people really found as a matter of convenience. And I'm the first one to say, here's where we can really get bipartisan agreement. I just talked to a person who sees things very different from me politically, a member of the legislature. Last week, we had, I think, a productive meeting, and this is one of the issues that came up, which is to say, can we agree on a few more guardrails in place, or maybe that's not the right word, but some standards that would make better the opportunity for people to use drop boxes. If they don't want to trust the U.S. mail and mail their ballot box back, but they don't want to go all the way to their county seat, or something like that, is there some place where they could drop that ballot if they continue to vote that way? That's one example of a way that we can broaden that method of voting. But as I mentioned earlier, I think it is absolutely here to stay. And reliably a third going forward, I would say that's probably conservative, are going to want to vote that way. So let's make sure we can design a system that accommodates what people want. It's exactly what Representative Greenman, the notes that she's been sounding. This isn't about what any of us on this call necessarily want. Let's listen to people. They're trying to tell us something. And when voters are trying to tell us something about how they want to vote or how they want their democracy to look, we ought to listen to what they're telling us. And they are telling us things. And one of the things they're telling us is they want more freedom and more flexibility about how they vote. So let's do that.
Great. I just want to again reiterate for the audience that Representative Omar is unfortunately not able to be with us at the moment. She is across the street from our office in Washington, D.C. voting on very important things this evening. And she did join us at the outset of the meeting and is kind of going back and forth between the office and the Capitol. And so maybe she'll be able to revisit us here in another minute or two, maybe not. And so we'll just continue on with the conversation. I'm Kendall Killian, the district director for the Congresswoman, joined here by Secretary of State Steve Simon and Representative Emma Greenman. Next question is, what specifically might HR 1 do for Minnesota? Have you two had a chance to look at it at the federal level? And are there things that we're already doing here in Minnesota that, are a part of this, that Minnesota has always been, since Joan Grow was in your role, Secretary of State Steve Simon, way ahead of the curve as a nation leader in voting? And are there things in this bill that, kind of draw upon, a lot of the things we've done here in Minnesota?
Well, I think we can both take a crack at that one. Let me start with the parts where the bill imitates and mirrors Minnesota. The old saying that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. And this is a case of that. So part of HR 1 includes things like same-day voter registration. Those of us who live here and grew up here take for granted that we have that. We've had it for, going on 50 years now. And yet we're one of only 16 states that has it, where you can stroll into your polling place on election day and either change your registration or register, if you've never been registered before. That's in HR 1. We've been doing it for decades. Similarly, we have online voter registration. Not every state has that. We have, as we mentioned earlier, so-called no excuses absentee voting, which is a mouthful and a clunky phrase, but it basically means, hey, if you want to vote from home, go for it. You don't have to give anyone a reason or an excuse from a list of government mandated excuses. You can just do it because you want to do it. Those are 3 examples of HR 1, which is groundbreaking and pioneering, but we've been doing that stuff for a long, long time. maybe I'll hand it over to Emma to talk about some of the new stuff.
Yeah, and I will say, and I said this to, I think, Congresswoman Omar, what I'm really grateful for is, and as somebody who in my previous life actually worked pretty hard on HR1, and really the idea that we're going to take a comprehensive approach, right? We're not going to just do a little bit of here, a little bit of there. We are actually going to say we need to think about all the ways that our democracy works, expanding and really protecting access to the ballot. And then thinking about the getting big money out of politics and really dealing with corruption, and also the redistricting reforms. And so I think on the voting stuff, to Secretary Simon's point, there's some stuff we do now. There's some stuff like automatic voter registration that 23 other states do, and we need to start doing here. Riding alongside this is, I think it's still HR 4, but is the Voting Rights Restoration Act that is really critical, especially with what we're seeing across the country, which actually would really put teeth back in the Voting Rights Act and ensure that for places that have a long history and we're seeing it right now in Georgia and Texas, in Arizona, and across the country really, of voter suppression, it will really give us teeth back to really prevent some of that. And so those pieces are really critical. And then I think the other piece is that, our state public financing system works and will look a little different than our federal one. But right now, a lot of the policies are the same that HR 1 is proposing and that House File 9 is proposing, because they're things we've seen work in other states. They're things that we have seen really successfully increase the diversity of candidates, of women, folks of color, new candidates, younger candidates. We've seen them change the makeup of the donor base, right? Being a much broader set of folks, a much a smaller donor set of folks, more folks from districts of candidates. And so those are the other pieces. I think what's exciting to me is that with the momentum coming out of HR 1 and all of that work, I think House File 9 really, we have work to do to get it passed in the Senate. In both bodies, but it is a really powerful thing, and I think it reflects again where Minnesotans and Americans are at right now.
Great. Our next question, I know Representative Greenman, you're a former organizer, so what could citizens do to get involved in this and to advance these reforms? And Congresswoman Omar always says, we get the future we organized for. So. Right. What's the call to action here to folks that are watching?
Yeah, thank you. And I the former and current organizer right now. So first, I'd say if you haven't reached out to your legislator and member of Congress, and if you have a champion like Representative Omar, then say thank you. Tell them this is something you care about. It is, as a new legislator, I will say that those emails and those calls, those ats on Twitter are really critical, because it's really important. We hear a lot about it, but that folks show that if this is important to you, show it's important to you, and reach out to your state, the state rep, state senator, and just let them know that these are issues that are important to you. The other thing is reach out to your networks. So whether that's your, on social, but also your friends, family, neighbors, because it's also really important. A lot of these issues, people sort of think about our democracy as the background of how we do this, but it is what 2020 has shown us is it has to be a priority. Investing in the infrastructure of our democracy, ensuring that Minnesotans are at the center. It has to be our first priority. And then the third thing I'd say is write a letter to the editor and figure out where are the spaces where you can write a letter to the editor, where you can post about it on Facebook and social media with a call. This is about organizing, and it's about the long fight, because what we know is we didn't get here by accident, and we're not going to fix it overnight. And so we really need to be focused on the things that we can do now, and also for the long term about how we ensure that we're centering voters and really creating that inclusive, multi-generational, multi-racial, gender inclusive democracy that we all want to build.
Secretary, anything to add?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is this. Having been a legislator myself, I was in the Minnesota House for 10 years, and having worked for a member of Congress, Congresswoman Omar's two predecessors ago, I worked for Martin Sabo briefly in the 5th Congressional District. My observation is this. It is much easier than folks think to get the attention of their legislator. I'm not saying you'll get their vote or you'll get their agreement, but to get the attention of a legislator or legislative staff is easier than you might think. You do not need a cast of thousands. You do not need expensive lobbyists, but simply an email campaign or calling or whatever will get attention. I want to make that clear. And I think some people somehow sell that short sometimes. They envision a much tougher process to penetrate and get through, and that isn't necessarily true. So I think it's important for people to take that shot, to make that effort, and to reach out, even as Representative Greenman says, even if someone's already with you, just to thank them, to try to get their attention. If you can get just a few other people to do that, that can really pay off.
Our last audience question for Secretary Simon. We saw an uptick in threats against various secretaries of state across the country in 2020 with the election results. What did we see here on the ground in Minnesota, and what was your experience?
Yeah, I mean, it was a harrowing time. I've never seen anything like it. You know, people can disagree, can be fierce about their disagreements, but this level of threatened or implied violence was something I have never encountered physically. I know Representative Congresswoman Omar is unfortunately used to those kinds of threats, but that's not something that I had been used to. And so what happened certainly nationally is many of my colleagues around the country in battleground states had armed protesters, multiples of them showing up at their home. And in January, in terms of Minnesota, we had some really nasty rhetoric. On the same day as the storming of the US Capitol, there was a rally at the Minnesota Capitol where the organizers said things into the bullhorns or microphones. I'm not talking about bystanders or attendees, organizers, like, if you don't meet with us, you're gonna make us do things we don't wanna do, or we're coming for you, and all the rest. So as a result, in January, my wife and I had to make the decision at one point about whether are we going to move our family into a hotel for a few days. I mean, we consulted with Capitol Security. We consulted with our local police department, who laid out our options for us. I want to emphasize nothing materialized, so I don't want to overstate the case. Fortunately, we did not have armed protesters showing up at our home, but we couldn't have known that at the time when it was happening amidst this really unsettling and toxic atmosphere, and amidst actual incidences of that happening in other states. So it was a scary time. I don't want to make it about me in particular, but it's just more evidence of a real a toxic atmosphere around the 2020 election, and the disinformation and lies that caused many people to be misled into taking action, sometimes violent action, as we saw on January 6th. So hopefully the fever will break. I do not think it has broken yet. It didn't break on January 20th. It hasn't broken yet. But through the efforts of all of us on this call, I think we can get it to break and make sure that people understand the reality and the facts about the election.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's about time to wrap up. So as a way of wrapping up, again, I just want to reiterate that Congresswoman Omar, apologizes for not being able to be with us for more of the hour. But moving toward closing things up, I guess I'd like to ask each of you for something you're hopeful about. Oh, look, the Congresswoman is back. We were just about to wrap up. So, Congresswoman, the thing we probably didn't hit on enough have to do with HR 1 and the impact of the insurrection on January 6th on the state of our democracy. And I don't know how much of this you've been able to listen to as you've been kind of going back and forth, but Representative Greenman and Secretary of State Steve Simon have done a great job of laying out what they're working on. And what do you have to add?
No, I have been following along on my phone. Thank you all for a wonderful conversation. I think it is important for people to understand that HR 1 truly does make our democracy more accountable and transparent. And we have to do everything that we can to get it through the Senate and get it to the president's desk. He signaled that he is eager to sign it into law. And we just now need to urge our fellow senators to do the heavy lifting and understand that this is a really important piece of legislation that needs to pass, and it's a must pass. They have to do everything that they can. I think for many of us, January 6th was a reminder of just how fragile our democracy could have been. And, we were lucky enough that democracy held, as Secretary of State Simon said. But we can't risk having similar event take place. We can't risk the continuation of the undermining of our democratic institutions. We can't risk democratic backsliding, and so we have to do everything that we can to continue to move forward and strengthen our democracy, because we are the beacon of hope for the rest of the world. Every single country that is in the struggle to democratize their institutions looks to the United States. I sit on the Foreign Affairs. Every ambassador that I talk to is eager to understand how what has happened to us could happen, and what we are going to do. And so the work we engage in the next couple of months, in the next year, and years into the future, will continue to set an example for the rest of the world that looks to us as an example. So I'm just grateful to our partners, Representative Emma Greenman and Secretary of State Steve Simon. Minnesota continues to set its own example and be an inspiration. I'm so glad we beat Colorado this year, and looking forward to beating them every election cycle. And just really grateful to all of you. And call your representative, call your senator, and tell them why it's important for HR 1 to pass. And if you are in the state of Minnesota, call your representatives to sign on to Emma Greenman's legislation, and continue to support Secretary of State Steve Simon in his endeavors in keeping our democracy strong. Till next time.
Thank you so much for the conversation.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.